So we are going to be reading from the book of Esther that tells the story of what happened to the Jewish people who stayed behind after the end of the Babylonian captivity. So that's the setting. By that point in time, it had become the nation of Persia. And so rather than, and the story of Esther is written on what is called a Megillah. So it's different than a Torah scroll that has two rollers to it. A Megillah only has one roller. They tend to be very ornate in nature rather than just simply the words that you would find in the Torah. And so our tradition here has been to, rather than just reading straightforward from the Megillah, to turn it into a little bit of a play by having different roles set up to read the actual Megillah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'Yeshua v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by Yeshua and has instructed us concerning the reading of the Megillah, which begins now. This is what happened during the time of King Ahasuerus, who reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, the fortress capital of Persia. In the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people, from the least to the greatest. On the seventh day, the king commanded Queen Vashti to come before him in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles. But when Queen Vashti refused to come, the king became furious and burned with anger. Then he consulted with his experts in matters of law and justice.
According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? She has not obeyed the command of the king.
Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but against all the nobles and all the peoples of the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all women. So women everywhere will despise their husbands and say,
Everyone? Women?
but she will not come. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let a royal order be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king. And let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she.
The king was pleased with this advice, so he sent orders to all parts of the kingdom, proclaiming in the language of all the people that every man should be ruler over his own household. Amen. No groggers, please. Later, the king remembered Vashti and what she had done. Then the king's personal attendants proposed,
let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king, and place them in the harem under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch. Then let the girl who pleases the king be made queen instead of Vashti.
The king liked this advice, and he followed it. When the king's order was proclaimed, many girls were brought to the harem. Now, Act 1, Scene 2.
Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jewish man from the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai. He had a cousin named Hadasha, also known as Esther, whom he had adopted as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When she was brought to the harem, Esther did not reveal her nationality, just as Mordecai had instructed her. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. When Esther's turn came to go before the king, he was attracted to her more than any of the other women, and she won his favor.
From this day on, Esther will be queen instead of Vashti. Let us place a royal crown upon her head, and let this day be a holiday throughout all the provinces.
Ta-da! Okay, Act 1, Scene 3. I'm here. And you too. A short time later, when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's officers became angry and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Mordecai overheard the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king.
O king, there is an evil plot by 2 of your officers. It was discovered by a good and honorable man named Mordecai.
Very well. My nobles will investigate this report, and if it is true, those 2 officials shall be hanged on a gallows.
And that is exactly what happened.
After these events, King Ahasuerus gave Haman the Agagite a place of honor above all other nobles. Everyone bowed down and revered Haman. But Mordecai would not bow down or give him reverence. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai,
Why do you disobey the king's command?
Because of my faith, I cannot bow down to anything or any person.
Day after day, they spoke to him, but Mordecai refused to comply. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down, he became very angry. And when he learned who Mordecai's people were, he looked for a way to destroy not only Mordecai, but all the Jewish people in the kingdom. In order to choose a day for their destruction, they cast the pur, meaning the lot, in the presence of Haman. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar.
All right? Go on the outside. Then Haman said to the king,
There is a certain people called the Jews scattered among the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let an order be given to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver in the royal treasury.
So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, saying,
Keep the money, Haman. But you may do whatever you want to those people.
The royal secretaries were summoned, and orders were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the month of Adar. In every province to which the order of the king came, there was great sadness among the Jews. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city crying bitterly. When Esther's maids came and told her about Mordecai, she was very upset. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther sent an attendant to speak to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate.
A terrible thing is about to happen. Go back and tell Esther to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people.
The attendant went back and reported to Esther and what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai,
All the people of the kingdom know that anyone who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned will be put to death. What can I do?
When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer.
Do not think that since you live in the king's house, you will escape the coming of destruction. For if you remain completely silent at this time, then relief and deliverance for the Jewish people will come from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. For who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai.
Go and fast for 3 days. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish.
All right. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing on the court, he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached the king.
What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you.
If it pleases the king, let the king, along with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for you.
Bring Haman at once, so that we may do what Esther asks.
So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther,
Now what is your petition? It will be given to you.
If the king regards me with favor, let the king and Haman come again tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question.
Haman went out that day in a happy mood. But when he arrived at the king's gate and saw that Mordecai still did not honor him, he became very angry at Mordecai. Later, at his home, Haman told his wife and friends about all the ways the king had honored him.
I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to join the king at her banquet tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate.
His wife Zeresh recommended that he build a gallows and ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Haman, he liked that idea, so he had the gallows built.
okay, Patty. Stand. Okay. Later that night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be read to him. There in the book was the record of the time when Mordecai had exposed the 2 officers who planned to kill the king.
What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?
Nothing has been done for him.
I see. Look, here comes Haman. I shall ask him. Haman, what do you think should be done for the man the king delights to honor?
Who would the king want to honor more than me? Therefore, have servants bring a royal robe and a horse with a royal crest on its head. Let them put the robe on the man whom the king wants to honor, and let him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor."
Very well, Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested. And do it for Mordecai, the Jewish man who sits at the king's gate.
Dun, dun, dun. Haman was shocked because he thought the king was going to honor him. And so he put the robe on Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him,
This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor.
Afterwards, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, and Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, but he was soon summoned to the banquet of Queen Esther. So the king and Haman went to dine with Esther. And as they were drinking wine on that second day, the king again asked,
Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? I will give you up to half the kingdom.
If I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases you, Majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request, for there is a plan to destroy us.
Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing?
The enemy is the terrible Haman.
The king got up in a rage and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king was deciding what to do with him, stayed behind to beg Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was resting.
Will he even harm the queen while she is with me in the house?
As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. And when Esther told how she was related to Mordecai, he was brought into the presence of the king. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. Esther again pleaded with the king about the evil plan of Haman against the Jewish people.
If it pleases the king, let an order be written overruling the one that Haman gave to destroy the Jews in the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people?
No order written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be changed, but another order can be written in the king's name for the Jewish people.
This order shall give the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves.
In every province, wherever the order went, there was such celebrating, and many people of other nationalities became Jews in that day. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, the original order was to be carried out. But on this day, when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the Jewish people fought back and defeated their enemies. On the 14th day, the people of the city rested, and on the 15th day, the people in the countryside rested.
Let everyone celebrate these days as a time when the Jewish people got relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into joy and their sadness into celebration.
Because of everything that happened, the Jews established the custom of observing these days for their descendants and anyone else who joins them. This holiday, called Purim, meaning lots, should be remembered in every generation by every family and in every city. King Ahasuerus imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores. Mordecai, a Jewish man, became second in rank to the king and was held in high esteem because he worked for the good and spoke up for the welfare of the Jewish people. Please stand. Oops. Take a bow, take a bow. Idan, Sivan, take a bow to the people. Okay, there we go, there we go. Thank you very much. At this point in time, it will be considered a severe violation of the Torah if you use your grogger during the sermon. Unless it's really that bad, and then that's on me. All right, well, I'm very impressed by the ability of our people to adapt to circumstances on the fly. Being in Israel during a time of conflict enhances your anticipation of what will follow. So having now returned from that land, my impression is that most Israelis are not focused on the grand scope of peace with those who are opposing them, while that has become an obsession with the rest of the world. And so this is, in particular, their concern. They're more desirous about having peace of mind because of what Hamas and Hezbollah have been doing. On our journey, we encountered many people who remained displaced from their homes, often staying at the same hotels that we stayed at. In fact, the hotels were full, in spite of there being no tourism to speak of there. We were the first group since October 7th for Sarel Tours, the largest tour agency in all of Israel. We were the first group to go. We encountered another group from South Africa and maybe two other groups along the way from other parts of the world, and one other from the United States. That was it. At a time when oftentimes there are literally hundreds of tour groups there, maybe even thousands. But yet the hotels were full because of the displaced people who came from the west, near Gaza, and came from the north, near Lebanon. On one occasion, I spoke for about 20 minutes to one evacuee while a number of our people were having an ice cream treat. I was talking to this woman who told me about her home in the kibbutz up in the far north, very close to the border. And this was a place where she and her husband had retired. But they had been separated from, she was telling me about her garden and all the trees that they had there, that they would go out and sit under the shade of the trees, just enjoying the day, enjoying their lives together. They have been now separated from their home for over 5 months, except for a very short period of time of 30 minutes when the Israeli authorities allowed people to go back to their homes to get something and to leave again. One time in 5 months. Clearly, the impression that I had was they wanted to go home, not to stay in a hotel. But they wanted to go home with an assurance that if they remained there, there would not be a threat of rockets being launched towards their home beyond the border, which at this point in time, there's no assurance whatsoever for that. So I trust that you can relate to their desires, that this is the priority in their lives right now, peace of mind as opposed to peace of the nations. But in many respects, their situation is not new. The Purim, for example, relates to this present day because only 50,000 Jewish people returned after the end of the Babylonian captivity to the land of Judea. The vast majority of the exiled Jews chose to stay in the kingdom that would then become Persia. The Jews of Persia flourished. Many of them attained high levels of influence in the government, including Esther, who became queen. There are a number of records that date back to that time on tablets that show that many other people became successful in business. They were merchants and craftsmen and bankers and scholars. Aside from paying taxes to the Persian kings, they enjoyed autonomy, and they lived according to Jewish law. By the time of the story of Esther, Jews were living in 127 provinces throughout that realm. Life was comfortable, and it was good. But then their peaceful lives were shattered by an organized plot to destroy them. They were helpless until Esther mediated a solution that gave them the ability to defend themselves and to restore their peace. And then that peaceful coexistence continued on throughout the Second Temple period, so that the population of the Jews of Persia was greater than the familiar communities in the lands of the Bible, of Judea and the Galilee. This is one of the things that very few people actually realize. There were more Jews in Persia during every story that we read about in the New Testament time and throughout the time of the intertestamental period, but we don't have any writings, more Jews in Persia that were in Judea and Galilee. In fact, the peace that continued for many more centuries there in the land of Persia until modern times, when Iraq expelled most of its Jewish community when Israel gained independence in 1948. And I'll be talking about that in particular in an upcoming week. Now, when we seek to understand the concept of peace in any generation, it is important to consider the underlying meaning in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew word shalom, translated as peace, literally means to be complete or safe. One of the topics that we had in our Hebrew class here. Same is true for the Greek equivalent, eirene, meaning peace. And it has that same sense of being complete or safe. In the Tanakh, shalom is used primarily in the sense of people living in harmony with other people, or describing the spiritual well-being of individuals. We see that emphasized in the way that people in Israel commonly greet one another. Instead of asking one another, "How are you?" it is customary to say, "Ma shlomach," "La shlomcha" for a man, or "Ma shlomech" for a woman. And you are literally saying, "What is your peace?" But there is more to this word shalom than simply feeling good about life. It is derived from the root shalem, meaning a completed transaction. So the word is frequently used in the sense of paying someone back, or repay, or making restitution. That's typically how you will see it translated, even though it has this connection to shalom. So the word picture we have in the Hebrew culture for the concept of peace is a person paying a price that secures safety for himself or for others who are meaningful to him. And that results in a situation where everyone is at peace. In other words, someone has to pay a price that purchases the peace. Now, there is another aspect of the concept of peace that is depicted in the sacrificial act known as the peace offering. Leviticus chapter 3 describes this particular offering that was conducted at the tabernacle and later on at the first and the second temples. If you studied the Torah with us, as we will do again coming this fall, you will recall that unlike the sin offering and the guilt offering that were mandatory for various sinful acts, the peace offering was voluntary in nature. It was offered whenever a person was especially thankful for being at peace in his life. Leviticus 3 begins by describing it this way. Now, if his offering is a sacrifice of peace offerings, if he is going to offer out of the herd, whether male or female, he shall offer it without defect before Adonai. He shall lay his hand on the head of the offering and shall slay it at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood around the altar. So that although we can see that this particular offering was voluntary in nature and that it was not required due to any kind of sin, a price still had to be paid in the form of an animal losing its life. It could be a cow from a herd, as it shows here in verse 1, or later on in verse 6, as we are told, it could be from a flock, meaning it could be a lamb or a goat. In either case, the animal had to be without defect, could not have any flaws whatsoever. And the one who was making the offering had to identify with the animal, symbolized by laying hands on the head of the sacrifice. So there was a symbolic connection between the person and the substitute, the sacrificial animal that was paying the price for the peace that the person had received. The book of Hebrews makes it clear that every kind of sacrificial offering was a foreshadowing of the greatest offering of all in the person of Yeshua. For we know of all human beings, and indeed even among all animals, he alone was the one who was absolutely, totally, completely without defect. He never sinned. He never did anything wrong. He never had a sin nature on top of all that. And like the way that his death provides the atonement that is necessary for our sins and the guilt that it causes, the same is true for our spiritual peace. So as this passage in Leviticus chapter 3 depicts symbolically, in order for us to find peace in our lives in the most perfect way, we can only find it in Yeshua. Like laying hands on the head of the offering, true spiritual peace is found when we identify with Yeshua. And most importantly, we can never have the kind of peace that is necessary for our souls unless a price is paid. In keeping with the underlying meaning of the word shalom, then, the price of Yeshua's life becomes our completed transaction, meaning that it is an act that never has to be repeated. For that reason, the author of the book of Hebrews affirms in chapter 9, verse 12, not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his, Yeshua's own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. And again, in the next chapter, chapter 10, verse 10, by this we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Messiah Yeshua once for all. And thus, with all of these truths, when we have them in mind, we take them collectively, Paul affirms in Ephesians 2:14 about Yeshua, for he himself is our peace. See, it's not just good enough to say that Yeshua provides us with peace or offers us peace. He is our peace. That is why you have to identify with him. You have to symbolically lay your hands upon his head. What is on his head? It's the piercings from a crown of thorns. It's just like coming in contact with Yeshua symbolically, saying that your death is for me. And that makes him our peace. Now, there is one more symbolic principle regarding peace that is evident in Scripture. The Bible depicts people living in peace as sitting under the shade of a tree or a vine. For example, in Genesis chapter 21, Abraham planted a tamarisk tree to represent the peace that he made with Abimelech. Later, according to 1 Kings 4:25, Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, that's from the north to the south, all the days of Solomon. So as in the case of Abraham, the imagery here is of people completing that work that was necessary to bring about peace, thus resulting in the ability of people to live in safety and to enjoy a tranquil life while resting in the shade. Well, can you say that about your life? Are you resting in the shade? Do you have genuine spiritual peace, knowing that a transaction has been fully completed on your behalf, never needing to be repeated? Or do you feel that tension like, right now I'm not feeling good enough, so I'm going to go out and try to do something else, another transaction that will get me to a place of peace? You see, you'll never get there because you can never be good enough. But Yeshua is always, always good enough. He covers us in this world so that we will have the peace of a life that is abiding in him. Here is what Yeshua himself declared in John 15:5. Oh, sorry. This one. Nope, I don't have it. Okay, you're going to have to trust me on this one here. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when I was doing this here. But the night was just getting started. Here's what Yeshua said about himself in John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. So altogether, then, this is what it means when we make Yeshua our peace. He is not just the one who paid the price that completed the transaction that gives us, secures for us the peace of salvation, so that you never need to worry about whether you're good enough, about whether that peace can be taken away from you. It is the peace of eternity that he gives us. But he also covers us in this world so that we might have a life of peace, but while abiding in him or remaining in him, staying with Yeshua throughout your life will give you the kind of peace that produces much fruit. And that is true peace in every way. So the implication for our personal lives is profound, and it is no less relevant for the people of Israel. And as we just witnessed, their lives are not tranquil at this moment. Peace, in all of its dimensions there, is very much elusive. For there is a physical conflict on every side. And to a great extent, the nation has not found genuine spiritual peace. Yes, there is a faithful remnant of believers in Yeshua, and it was our privilege to meet some of them. And it was just such a joy to see their vitality and their faithfulness pressing on in spite of the warfare all around them. But for the great majority of the people in the land, they are searching for spiritual peace in the wrong place. Whether it is in the burdensome religious way of the Orthodox or the New Age explorations of young people, as we saw evident at the music festival on October 7th. That is why we, all of us, must remain intercessors for Israel. We must never cease praying for God's revival in that land, continually claiming his promise in Romans 11:26 that all Israel will be saved. Indeed, that day is promised prophetically in another way. I want to share this with you from Micah chapter 4. This is one of the more amazing passages of Scripture that will be very evident for you as there are certain elements that we incorporate even in our own worship. And it begins with these words. It will come about in the last days that the mountain of the house of Adonai will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and the peoples will stream to it. Those of us that were on our tour really got to experience how Jerusalem is a very mountainous area. You always go up to Jerusalem. People are not exactly streaming to it right now. 37 did here a couple of weeks ago. But a day is coming here where you're going to see great numbers of people going up to Jerusalem. But notice here clearly this is a passage that is set in the future. And the greater context of Scripture shows that this will be what transpires in the millennial kingdom, with Jerusalem at the center. Verse 2 goes on to say, many nations will come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of Adonai and to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. Sound familiar to you here? From the companion passage in Isaiah 11, we know that this refers specifically to the one known as the branch, who came from the stem of Jesse, which makes him the son of David, and that is Yeshua. You see, Yeshua is the one who will reign from Jerusalem. Can you imagine how that's going to change this world? Can you deny Yeshua? Can you say, no, we're going to hold out on doing what he says? Not so much. But notice here also where it says that it will be a time that he, Yeshua, will teach us about his ways and that we may walk in his paths. Well, he did that with his disciples. But I think Yeshua only scratched the surface, like in the Sermon on the Mount and so on. We're going to know what the Torah really means in its deepest way, because walking means that you are following it in its totality. You are going with what God has already declared. Notice the familiar phrase about the Torah going forth from Zion and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. That's the line that we declare in our liturgy, Ki Mitzion, every single time. It comes from here, from Micah 4:2. This describes a time like no other when God's word will be the constitution for all people. There will be no need for man-made laws. We will only abide by the laws of God, articulated by the great judge of Yeshua. And here's what verse 3 says about that. And he, Yeshua, will judge between many peoples and will render decisions for the mighty, distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Again, a very familiar passage to those of us who worship here. This describes the world that we all desire. A world without war and terror. A world marked by true peace. But the context shows that it can only occur under the reign of Messiah. And that is what we await. Then as the passage continues in the next verse, verse 4, we are told this. Each of them, this is the people that will be in the millennial kingdom, each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Though all the peoples walk each in the name of his God, as for us, as I trust for you, we will walk in the name of Adonai our God forever and ever. As we have seen, this here in verse 4 is the final marker of peace. And it is people dwelling safety because the full price has been paid by Yeshua that allows people then to sit in the shade under the vine and under a tree and enjoying benefits of the citizenship in the kingdom of heaven that will never end. That is what God has promised for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and people from every nation who believe in the Messiah and the Redeemer of Israel. That is Yeshua. You see, this is what makes it our great hope for the future. But that does not diminish our need to be committed to peace in our present day. Without question, people are searching for various kinds of peace in this world. And that's something that we have witnessed firsthand in our travels in Israel. But since true peace is found in Yeshua alone, we must remain committed to being messengers of his way of peace in our own words and in our deeds and in our intercessory prayers, as well as the way that we stand with those in the front line of testimony. Those of us who were on our journey here recently were able to establish connections, people there in the land that we intend to continue to support financially and with our prayers. So my hope is that this present generation of people in Israel will see us standing with them and will accept our testimony in each of these dimensions as we were there, as we continue to intercede for them, and as we support those who are taking the gospel to the people there in the land. The same must be true in our own local communities and even in our own families and our circles of friends. Is there someone in your circle of life who is estranged from you? Is there someone in your life where you have experienced conflict that has not been resolved. Yeshua declared, "Blessed are the peacemakers." As I see it, he has called us to step up and to make every effort to restore the peace. And in fact, I am convinced that he does not give us the option of rejecting it. We are called to be peacemakers in every way. And that means then, if we are going to follow the example of Yeshua, that means being willing to act sacrificially, just like him, in paying the price of peace, in restoring broken relationships. Can we do the same? Are you willing to pay the price to restore a relationship? To swallow your pride? To not get that satisfaction that you crave in a relationship? Find a way to make peace with someone who has a relationship that needs to be restored. May we always be dedicated to being people of peace in every way. No matter where we may be, let us follow the example also of Esther in the story of Purim, who was convinced that she was called and that she was raised up to have a calling on her own life to bring about peace for such a time as this. May that be our prayer and our calling as well.